Welcome to the book club where the size is just right, the books aren't too long, and you never need to host. That's our job. We bring best-selling and award-winning writers of every genre to Twin Cities metro area libraries to share their stories, discuss their work, and answer those burning questions you've always wanted to ask your favorite authors. This is a book club where we don't have to argue about what the author meant. They can tell us. The book club that doesn't require a clean house or wine and cheese. And in this book club, if you haven't read the book, it's all right. Although, we hope you'll be inspired to pick it up next time you're in the library. I'm your host, Slade Kemet, and you can consider the book club rewritten because this is Club Book. Club Book is made possible by Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, MELSA, and Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. We would also like to thank our partnering bookseller, Red Balloon Bookshop. This podcast features David Housewright at Ramsey County Library, Roseville. David Housewright is one of Minnesota's best-known and most prolific mystery writers. His breakout debut, Penance, marks its 30th anniversary in 2025. Penance introduced readers to private investigator Holland Taylor, the first of Housewright's indelible detective heroes, and won Housewright the Mystery Writers of America's prestigious Edgar Award for Best First Novel in 1996. Practice to Deceive in 1997, the sophomore outing for Holland Taylor, garnered Housewright his first Minnesota Book Award. Housewright is also the pen behind Rushmore Mac McKenzie, a St. Paul cop-turned-investigator with an acerbic wit and an independent fortune, which allows him to pursue cases out of a sense of justice, rather than financial gain. 2 installments in the ongoing Mac McKenzie series, Jelly's Gold in 2009 and Curse of the Jade Lily in 2012, also won the Minnesota Book Award. Housewright's latest page-turners include Man in the Water in 2024, a whodunit that picks up with a body but no crime scene, motive, or suspects, and in fact, no proof of murder at all.
I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for making me feel really old. 30th anniversary. I hadn't thought of that. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. This is my library. Yes, personally, my library. I remember when they had the grand reopening after they redesigned it. William Kent Kruger and I were the guests. And now I get to tell everybody, yeah, me and Kent were like this. So, and it all began here. No, it didn't. But, you know, it occurs to me I could give you a really nice 20-minute lecture on why the modern American mystery novel is the most important literature being written today. I might even convince you. But really, what would you guys want to know? What do you want to talk about? Anybody, work with me here.
Our first question of the night comes from an audience member wondering how Housewright chooses locations for his novels.
Well, it depends. I like to deduct my vacations on my taxes, so that figures prominently into it. Okay, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories to give you an idea. I was chatting with this gentleman who was from Anoka. Years ago, I had a friend who was the city manager at Coon Rapids. And no, she wasn't a city manager, excuse me. She was the assistant city attorney at Coon Rapids. And she invited me out. I played hockey with her husband. She invited me out and she gave me a tour of the cop shop and the courts and the jail and all this cool stuff. And I just wrote all this stuff down and I threw it in an envelope. I got a big envelope in my office that says novel ideas on it. And I just throw notes into it. Okay, so now I'm plotting out dead boyfriends and I'm asking myself, where am I going to put this? Well, I got all this great stuff from Anoka, so I'll have it in Anoka. Oh my God. This was my first experience with nasty emails. The city manager of Anoka sent me an email and demanded to know why I'm picking on Anoka. And I wrote back, because it's your turn. And so that's what happens. I did a book signing at a bookstore. No, I did another library event in Red Wing about, a couple years ago. And this woman comes up to me and she's mad, she's angry. What have I done to offend you? She wanted to know why I have never killed anybody in Red Wing. Says you kill people in Grand Marais and Pipestone and all these places around us. Why not? What do you got against Red Wing? So I promised her, the next book I write, I will kill somebody in Red Wing just for you. So I wrote Man in the Water, which came out last year. And the river is important to this book. And so moving down to Red Wing and killing a guy actually worked plot-wise. So I killed a guy off, and then the book comes out, I go back to Red Wing, I'm doing a signing in a bookstore, and the woman comes up to me. Only one? So, the ideas, where you pick, sometimes it's considered. Like when I wrote Dead Man's Mistress and Grand Marais, all of that, there was a reason for that. But sometimes it's just, I've been to Pipestone, why not shoot somebody in Pipestone? There's a really great cafe where it's open 24/7, best, desserts. Yeah. Put a little blood in the parking lot, they won't mind.
This audience member asked if David Housewright will write a novel centered around ice hockey.
I'm not going to write about ice hockey. And things like that are, even though I still play, because I don't know what story I would write. I have my wife's cousin is married to Ron Capps, who is an NHRA drag racer. And I know him, I chatted with him. We've been up to Brainerd for the races and that stuff. And I keep thinking, there's gotta be something here. I got nothing. I'm not saying I will never do that, but I don't have a story in my head that I can work that out with. And that's one of the things. You start with the story. What is it you're gonna write about? What story are you going to tell that allows you to explore whatever it is you're going to explore? And then you figure it out. I checked my friends from the other side of the river. We were talking about book clubs. Okay, let me tell you another story. Years ago, I read an article in the Boston Globe. Don't ask me what I was doing reading the Boston Globe. And it was about the guy who inspired the movie The Thomas Crown Affair. Now what happened was, he gets out of school, he's working for a bank, he is bored out of his mind. And he kept telling his friends how easy it would be to rob this bank. And finally, his friends are like, if it's so damn easy, why don't you rob the bank? And he does. And he gets away with $284,000. And this was back when that was real money. And he literally walks out of the bank on a Friday, close of day, with a shopping bag filled with cash. They don't find out about this until Monday. They knock on his door and poof, he's gone. Now they indicted this guy in absentia. They had video of him loading up the tank, right? They indicted him so that he couldn't come back 7 years later and go, ha ha ha, suckers, right? So for 50 years, and I am not exaggerating that number, for 50 years, the US Marshals tried to find this guy and couldn't do it. And then he died. And something in his obituary alerted the marshals So they went and they interviewed his family. And his family admitted that on his deathbed, as he lay dying, he admitted that he was Thomas Crown, that he's the guy who stole all that money and moved across the country and started a business and got married and raised a family and became a pillar of the community. By the way, I tried to call the U.S. Marshals to ask them what it was. You know, was it a birthday? What was it that alerted them? They weren't interested in talking to me. So I had that in my pocket for years, wondering, what am I going to do with that? Okay, I have a buddy of mine who was when I was in the advertising business, she was an art director. And she and I worked on several projects together. And she gives me a call and she tells me I gotta come and I have to talk to her book club. I don't do book clubs, unless there's really a lot of alcohol involved. Anyway, sure. So I go to the book club, and the book club is being held on a hill behind the house where she lived. And this hill was surrounded by all these houses. And one guy owned the hill. And all his life, he let people hang out on the hill. People got married on this hill. But they were all upset because this guy is getting old, and you know they were talking about assisted living and what his kids are going to do. Will they sell it to developers and so on and so forth? And then, click. I remembered the Thomas Crown guy, and that became the book In a Hard Wind. So you ask where you pick stories come from and locations come from. They come from everywhere, but it's not like I'm like, oh, that's a nice bar. I think I'll shoot a guy in the parking lot. You know, it doesn't work that way. But it all molds together.
This question is, if once Housewright chooses a location for a book, will he visit that area for a while to assist with his writing?
Usually, yes. I want to know the place. And yeah, I go to most of them. I say most of them, even though I'm sitting here thinking, where haven't I gone that's in a book? Them Bones, for example, there's a big section that takes place in Toronto. And every place I mentioned in Toronto, I've been to. I did one, Dead Man's Mistress, which is Grand Marais, Thunder Bay, and Quebec City. And I was in all those places. Stealing the Countess, you know, where we go to Philadelphia. Yeah, I was in all those places. So I tried to be in those places. Now, if I'm just driving through the city, for example, the book I just finished that I sent off to my publisher, there's a chapter that takes place in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And I haven't been to Eau Claire, Wisconsin in 30 years. But the city isn't important to the story. It's just this is where the person is that the guy McKenzie needs to talk to. So I didn't bother to learn all of that. I didn't, you know, I researched it and I made sure I looked at the maps and all that stuff to get it right. But that wasn't important to the story, so I didn't go there. Mostly I'm in all the places where the scenes take place, which raises a question. I mentioned dead boyfriends, and I get the nasty emails. I did a library event at Rum River Public Library right after the book came out, and the place was packed. I mean, it's standing room only. And I'm thinking of all these nasty emails, and I'm going, oh my God. So I just stood there and I said, all right, you know, I took my shots. You know, your turn. And that's when I found out people love that. The women in Red Wing, why don't you shoot somebody in Red Wing? People love that. And I didn't really appreciate it. I didn't appreciate the relationship readers have with the characters and the places the characters are at. Now, for example, in Dead Boyfriends, I mentioned a coffee house called the Avant-Garden Coffee House, home of the Anoka Mocha. And McKenzie makes fun of the Anoka Mocha and goes down the street to a coffee house where you can get tattoos, all right? So I'm doing the library event, and the woman is sitting here, just far away from me. And she looks at me and goes, "What does McKenzie have against the Anoka Mocha?" She's the owner of the coffee house. And she didn't ask, "What do I have against it?" What does McKenzie have against it? Like, this is a guy I know, I'm just telling his stories, right? And I look at her and I go, I don't know, sometimes he can be such an asshole. And a woman over here gets up and goes, "Yeah, the way he treated Nina in chapter 3? And I'm like, I talk to him, he doesn't listen. So it's interesting to me when people have that connection, because I don't. And maybe it's because I'm doing it, from a distance, but I never once got up in the morning and said, I wonder what McKenzie's doing.
Our next question is if David Housewright ever thinks of a story first and then assigns it to a series.
Mostly I don't, but sometimes I do, and I know that sounds pretty contradictory, but I got to give you a history first. My first 3 novels were Holland Taylor novels. And then my publishing house got bought up by W.W. Norton, a much bigger publishing house. And they bought this house, the house I was with, for their health books and their cookbooks and all their outdoor books and stuff. They didn't even know who I was. A publicist called my house asking for Steve Housewright. And I have a cousin named Steve. And my wife answers the phone and says, "Well, can I ask who's calling? We're not going to give out numbers." And she identifies herself. I'm a publicist with W.W. Norton. And Renee says, "You sure you don't want to talk to David Housewright, the award-winning author?" And the publicist said, "No, I'm pretty sure his name is Steve." So that's when I knew I was screwed. And my agent agreed. So then we created the McKenzie series a couple years later and did very well. But there are some stories I cannot tell in McKenzie's voice because of who the character is and how he's projected through the books. You guys remember when William Kent Kruger killed off Cork O'Connor's wife? Yes. You guys happy about that? No. He was shocked. He was just flabbergasted. He had no idea that pushback would be so strong, that people would be so angry at it. But you read his books, and the tone and the mindset of the books, the sensibilities, that allowed that to happen. And for Cork to do what he does and still be him. I was plotting out a book called, at the same time this was going on, I was plotting out a book called Madman on a Drum. And in the original version, somebody was going to kill Nina. And McKenzie was going to go off the rails. He was going to go full-blown vengeance mode. And his friends are trying to keep him from going to prison as he slaughters a great number of people. And then I found out what happened to Kent. And he's telling me these stories, and I'm going, no, I don't think I'm going to do that. So I changed it where Bobby Dunson's daughter, Victoria, gets kidnapped, and that McKenzie does what he does. All right. Excuse me. A couple of years later, I'm having dinner with my my editor, and I told him the story. And he looks at me and goes, "There's no way on earth we would have allowed you to publish that." Because he said that would have killed the series. Because McKenzie could not do those things and then go back to being McKenzie. And he was right. So when you ask me about the stories, the Taylor novels are stories that I cannot tell in Mackenzie's voice. There are things that Taylor does out of hand that Mackenzie wouldn't even dream of. And I don't want to give away any of the books because I want you to run out right now and buy them, or at least, at least put a hold on them. But he does things that Mackenzie would find appalling. And that's the point. Now, I have a book that just came out in April called Girl in a Dumpster. And it's the same thing. This is a much grittier kind of story. And in it, Taylor does things that Mackenzie wouldn't dream of. And that's why I do it, because there are some stories I simply can't tell in that voice.
This club book audience member wonders if David Housewright outlines his novels before he sits down to write.
This is an ongoing debate in the writing community and how you go about figuring out your stories. And there's a whole group of people that just sit down and write. And I remember I did this TV thing with Matt Goldman about not that long ago, a few months ago. And this one came up. And he sits down and he writes. And then he gets done with the first draft. And then he goes back and he rewrites it. And then he goes to another draft. And he'll get 6 or 7 drafts. I have never written more than 1 draft ever. And the reason is because I have it in my head. When I first started writing my first book, my first published book, we'll go into my college days later, I owned my own advertising agency in St. Paul, Gerber Housewright. And you spend a lot of time running your own business. And so I plotted everything out. I knew exactly what was going to happen all the time. I knew what research I needed to do. I knew what kind of people I needed to ask questions of. And I had it all figured out. And the reason was because writing time was at a premium. I had to squeeze it in between, job and family and all that. And I didn't want to stare at my screen going, God, what was I thinking? This way I always knew I could go 2 weeks without writing a word and still jump into it. Okay, after a while, those outlines became much, much looser. And right now, they're just a pile of notes that I have stacked up on my desk. But I have it here. I have the story in my head before I begin. I know how it ends before I write the first word. I have written 31 novels, 6 editors, 4 publishing houses, and I've never been asked to make changes that took me longer than an afternoon. And that, I like to say that's because of my superior craftsmanship. But mostly it's because of the process, because of the way I write. And I argued with Matt, as far as I'm concerned, that first draft, that's just a glorified outline. And now you're going to rewrite your outline. A lot of people do, so many people do it differently. Everybody has their own process. E.L. Doctorow, who may be my personal favorite writer, he talked about writing as far as your headlights could see. So he would plot out a book to a certain point, then write it, then plot it out some more, and then write it. Worked for him. So my argument is whatever gets you to finish the book is a good system.
Another question asker wonders if Housewright ever tracks the amount of time it takes to write a novel.
I refuse. Because that would just tell me I'm making about $1.12. And that's on a good week. No. I don't. I mean, the amount of time that it takes that you put in, if you start going by the hourly rate, nobody would do it. Excuse me. I was in Nashville last year, and I remember a bunch of us were chatting about it. And there's this one woman who came up with these numbers. Now, I don't know where their numbers came from, but they seem honest to me based on people I knew. And she claimed that 85% of the people who write a book will never write more than 3, because the reward versus the amount of work is just not there. 90 will never write more than 6. 95 will never write more than 12. And again, it's the amount of money you get versus how much work you put into it. I would not have been able to do what I did if it wasn't for my wife, who had a stable corporate job with a 401k and got paid every couple of weeks as opposed to twice a year, you know, from royalty checks. So, yeah, it's a tough gig.
Our next question is when David Housewright knew he wanted to become a writer.
I make jokes about this as well, because I have friends who they'll tell you when they became writers. They'll have an epiphany of some sort, a teacher or a book or a life experience that they had to put on paper. Or I had a friend of mine, she was in a cold case unit of a police department. I don't want to give more than that. And she started writing just to get the stuff out of her head. I didn't have those advantages. I was just that guy. I remember when my parents, for reasons that I still have never found out, gave me a printing press when I was 12 years old, a hand-cranked printing press. And you would punch the words out letter by letter on tape. And you would put the tape on the drum. And you would ink it up and you would run sheets out. And my very first book was called Swinging Danger. It was about a kid who put up a rope swing, what we used to call a Tarzan swing, even though everybody told him he was going to fall and break his neck. And he did fall, and he broke his wrist. And like all first novels, it was highly autobiographical. And that was it. I've always been a writer. I wrote for a school newspaper. I was writing for the Minneapolis Tribune sports department when I was 18 years old, before I even started college. Now, mostly I'm just in the office running copy back and forth and that, but I was doing a lot of stringing. I was covering MAIA cross country or Big Ten gymnastics or AAU swimming or 9-man football in Fergus Falls. I just loved it. So I was always that guy. And I tried to write several novels when I was younger, and they were astonishingly bad. I mean, they were unreadable. And I kept them. And I put them in a briefcase. And years ago, we were in the attic doing something, and I came across the briefcase. I put it down in my office, and I'm reading the books, and I can't believe I wrote this crap. I'm going, are you kidding? I had nicknames like The Roommates and Something Happened, you know, and I'm going, somewhere along the line, I must have figured it out.
We go to an audience member inquiring if Housewright had a hard time getting his first novel published.
I thought I did. At the time, I was, oh my God. But having talked to God knows how many writers since then, no. I wrote the book, it took me a year. I got an agent, took me another year. The agent got a publisher, took another year. And we ended up in a small house in Connecticut called Foul Play Press, which was an imprint of Countryman Press. And I tell that story, and people are like, oh, really? let me tell you this. And then they go on about how many books were written and how many different places and rejections and whatever. And I'm like, wow, I got lucky. And then, of course, I won the prize, and that opened up everything. All my books were going to be reviewed. All my books are going to be, out on the shelves, and people are going to answer my phone calls, and I'm going to get invited to do stuff that and yeah, just push me down the track.
This question is if David Housewright tries to limit the number of characters he has in each book.
No. Well, it makes me nervous. I've been accused of having way too many characters in books. And the next one is going to push the envelope because there's at least 24. Actually, yeah, 24 suspects. I am not exaggerating. It's I don't know what the hell I'm thinking. I have gotten that. I've gotten that criticism where it's hard to keep track. But I try to keep the stories as honest as I can. And I'm not going to write Murder on the Orient Express. I'm not going to write Mousetrap, where you got 8 people stuck in a whole house and that's it. You know? So my books tend to be more procedural than they are mysteries anyway. In that we're not necessarily trying to find out exactly how something happens. Sometimes we do, but it's a little more up and down than that. So yeah, I get a lot of characters. But this next one's pushing the envelope. If I get a phone call tomorrow, my editor says, hey, pal, I'll believe it.
Here, we have a reader wondering if Housewright listens to his audiobooks.
I do not listen to recorded books. I especially don't listen to mine. And the reason is because, 2 reasons. The first is they put me to sleep. I'm sorry. The second reason is the voice is never the same. I was telling this story before. I'm pals with Linda Barnes. Now, Linda Barnes is a writer from Boston, and she writes the Carlotta Carlisle books, or at least she used to. And she used to direct plays and stuff like this. So she comes to town, and she's doing a signing at Once Upon a Crime in Minneapolis, and I drop by. I'm going to buy her a beverage afterwards, and I'm sitting way in the back because I don't want to intrude on her signing. And she starts to read, and she pulls out her book, and she says, now this is Carlotta Carlisle's voice, and starts reading it. And I'm in the back of the room, and I'm going, no, that's not how she sounds. No, Linda, you're getting it wrong. So no, I don't do that. I listened to about 90 seconds of one of my audiobooks. I got about 18 or 19 out now. And that was it. I couldn't do it anymore.
Our next question is why David Housewright decided to write mysteries.
The first books I tried to write were not mysteries. They were literary fiction. Don't get me started on that. When I was plotting out Penance, originally it was not going to be a mystery. Penance was meant to be about political corruption. And I was channeling Gore Vidal. And as I'm plotting out the book, it occurred to me, I throw a couple of dead bodies on the floor, this would be a great crime novel. And I did. And as they point out, I won the prize that year. I think it's because back in those days, I was reading 5 or 6 mysteries for every non-mystery. So I was very much immersed in the, I don't want to say the culture of the mystery, but the construction of it. I understood it. I'll tell you a Nevada bar story in a minute. So I think it wasn't so much me choosing mysteries as mysteries choosing me. And that's how it happened. Now, I mentioned Nevada. She was an actor. That's how I got to know her. I had cast her in commercials and videos and stuff like that. And she was writing novels. We had conversations about it. She went to Once Upon a Crime bookstore and went to Steve Stillwell, who was the owner then, and said, give me 12 novels, all different kinds. Steve's always happy to help a pretty girl, so he gives her 12 books. She goes home and she outlines those books. She breaks them down. She goes back, she gets another 12. She goes back, she gets another 12. And that's what taught her the construction of the crime novel. Not only taught her how it's done, but the different kinds of stories she could tell, and what kind of characters, what kind of voice she could use. And she used that experience to create the Anna Pigeon series, which did very, very well for Miss Barr. So she chose mysteries. She did it very deliberately. Not so much. You know, I read a lot. I read a lot of non-mysteries as well. The last non-mystery I read was Once in a Blue Moon Cafe by Lorna Landbeck, who I think has the most authentic Minnesota voice of us all. But yeah, that's how it happened.
This question is if Housewright ever worries about coming up with original ideas.
I do. First of all, I don't read while I'm writing. And then when I get done with the book, I'll just start binging. I got stacks of them, and I'll just go through 12 of them in about 2 weeks. I mean, you know. The question, of course, years ago, I was doing an interview on NPR with Catherine Lamper, was she that back then, and Pete Houtman. And I mentioned in one of my books I had a gunfight, not a gunfight, but some events take place in front of the old, what's the name of the theater in Uptown? Maybe it's the Uptown Theater, I don't know. And then, so I wrote it. Okay, I finished the book, and then I read one of John Camp's book, John Sanford's book. And he has a gunfight in the exact same spot. So I go back and I rewrite the scene and I put it somewhere else. And I mentioned this on the radio, and Pete Houtman basically says, well, that's the dumbest damn thing I've ever heard. Why would you do that? His advice, which I took to heart, is to write your books. If you're going to write in Minnesota, you're going to write in the Twin Cities, write them as if nobody has ever written a book that took place in the Twin Cities. And just don't worry about it. Nobody's going to read that scene and go, whoa, wait a minute. He stole that from Stanford. I mean, you just don't. At least that's what Houtman's argument was, and I agree with him. So I don't worry about that anymore. I just write what I want to write.
An audience member asks if David Housewright is a fan of TV mysteries.
I do. I don't watch them with my family anymore because it drives them nuts. Because I'll have it figured out by the third commercial break. And the reason is because most, especially TV, because it's short, there's a thing what I call the economy of narration. If somebody gives you a set of keys in the show, we're doing the closer, and a guy walks up to Brenda and gives her the set of keys and says, you gotta be careful with these, this is the only set of keys that exist. Well, then I'm just gonna sit back and wait to find out who had the keys last, and that's the guilty party. And it would drive my kids nuts. Oh, God, they'd get pissed. I remember we went to see the movie, what was the name of it? Knives Out. We're sitting in the theater. Hey, I think I shut up. Quiet. And I was right, by the way. you do it for a while, you get to understand how it works. And if you know how it works, then sometimes you'll understand why certain things stand out. You go into a university, and you got a lab. You go in there to talk to a guy, but you spend 10 minutes talking to another guy. The other guy is there. Why is that other guy there? It's there to serve the story. So you just put that check down, and then you wait to see if he comes back. And that's how it works.
We have a question about what other writers inspire David Housewright.
You go back to the old guys. You go back to Ross MacDonald and certainly Dashiell Hammett, who was huge in the industry, and Raymond Chandler. Raymond Chandler wrote an essay called The Simple Art of Murder. And basically it was a response to a New Yorker article that somebody wrote making fun of Agatha Christie. And in this article it was called Who Cares Who Killed Roger Ackroyd? And Raymond Chandler wrote this essay in response, and he talked about the mean streets. He used a lot of things that became tropes in the business, about the guy who walks the mean streets who isn't mean himself, that sort of thing. And one of the things he talked about that I glommed onto was giving murder back to the people who actually commit murders. 80% of the killers in Agatha Christie's books would never kill anybody. Come on. I'm going to murder this woman because she got credit for my roses? Are you serious? I mean, I'm not saying it's never been done. I'm just saying it's just, And so I always keep that in mind. Why? Why would somebody do something? There's got to be a reason besides some frivolous little petty thing. That's just the way I think about it.
This question is if Housewright has a favorite character outside of his protagonists.
Probably my favorite is Heavenly Petrick. And I have been asked to write books about her, and I won't do it. Because I think that the secret to her, the reason people seem to like her is because they don't know her. They don't know how she became the person she became. They don't know why she does what she does besides the cash. And I want to keep it that way. Truthfully, I don't know why either. So I bring her back every now and again. She's in Them Bones. I bring her back in Them Bones. And we talk a little bit about her background, or her lack of clarity about her black background. So, but this is another thing. You get a lot of writers who, they're character-driven. And they talk about how they have to create the characters, and they have to really know who these characters are. And then they figure out the story that these characters are going to tell. And I've had people come to me, literally, say, the book was going to go one way, but my character wouldn't let it. And my response is, who the hell's in charge here? Now, I get it. I get that you write a character, and all of a sudden you need a character to do something, and you wrote the character so no. Well, then my response is you go back and rewrite the damn character. The characters are there to serve the book. They're there to tell the story. That's why they exist. Sometimes I come up with the story and then I figure out what it's about. Most often I figure out, what am I going to write about? I'm going to write about identity. I'm going to write about family legacy, 150-year-old legacy. You want to keep going? You want to be prisoner of that 150 years later? That sort of thing. And then I'll say, okay, what story can I tell that lets me explore these ideas? Okay, what characters do I need to make that story, to propel the story forward? That's how I work. I don't even give my characters, a lot of characters, names until like halfway through the book. I'm not kidding. I'll be like Thug 1 or lawyer or DA or ADA or whatever. I use place names. And then later on, I'll go, okay, I need names for these guys, and they got to be different. They got to be easily recognizable. And I've got books in my office. Like my son, when he got his MBA, I got a list of all the people who were graduating in his class and stuff like that. And I'll just go, oh, that's a good name, and I'll do that. And I'll change the first name to match us, that sort of thing. But that's how I do it. Sometimes I do collect names, and I will hang on to them. And if I find a character, I will use a real name. Sometimes I do it to the guys I play hockey with just to annoy them. We won't go into that. But that's how it works with me. The character is there to serve the book, not the other way around. But again, some really great writers do it that way.
Our last question of the night comes from an audience member wondering what David Housewright likes to read for fun.
Mysteries. I read a little bit of everything. I was mentioning before I read Lorna Landbeck. I read some Dennis Lehane. I read all of Kurt Vonnegut. Patrick O'Brien's Nautical Adventures with Lucky Jack Aubrey and Steve Matern. I kept the last one. I haven't read the last one because I know once I do, it's over. So I've been hoarding that. I read whatever happens to be there, whatever comes to mind. I have stacks mostly of mysteries because I have friends who write these. And you go to the conventions and you go to the group hugs and stuff, and you gotta buy a book, right? And I got like 15, 16 Kent Kruger's books. I think I read like 8. I got about 9 Freeman's. I think I read 4. I think I got most of Jess Lowry's, and I haven't read the last 3. I just haven't had time. I haven't got around to it. Mindy Mejia, a few others, But I read whatever comes about. Should I tell you my Vince Flynn story? Yes. Vince Flynn sent me the manuscript for his very first book and asked me to give him a quote, and I wouldn't do it. I told him that there are errors in this book you need to fix. You have people, FBI, doing things that they legally are not allowed to do and stuff like that. I think you got to get some research. I told him I like the stories, I appreciate the characters, but it's dishonest. You got to get this right. Mystery readers will know it, and they'll let you know. He ignored me, published a book, got a $250,000 deal, and never spoke to me again. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it very much. Take care.
That wraps up our Ramsey County Library event with David Housewright. Make sure to catch our last podcast of the season with Jessie Q. Sutanto. Jessie Sutanto writes across genres for all ages. Adult readers may know her best for her break-the-mold detective stories like Dial A for Aunties and Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. Shopkeeper turned sleuth Vera Wong returned with a new adventure this April. Visit us online at clubbook.org for details on past and present seasons. Sign up for our e-newsletter, check out our calendar, and so much more. Stay up to date with all of our events at our Club Book Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, find us using the handle ClubBookMN. And if you enjoy these free Club Book events and podcasts, remember to share them with your friends. They just may too. Thanks again to all those who make Club Book possible, including Melsa, Library Strategies, and Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Our sponsors include Red Balloon Bookshop, where you can purchase all the books featured in Club Book. Finally, a very special thank you to all the libraries hosting events this season. That's it for Club Book, the coolest club in town. We'll see you at the library.